It was late October 2019. I had just turned 31 and decided I needed to get away from the city noise for a while. I'd been living in Des Moines for the last 10 years, working a maintenance job at an industrial warehouse. Same grind every day, and the walls were starting to close in. I hadn't taken a real break in almost 2 years. No beach trip, no Vegas weekend, nothing. I grew up in the country though, northwest Iowa, around Spencer. Back then, my dad used to take me out hunting every fall. He'd wake me up before the sun came up, load the gear into the back of his old blue F-150, and we'd spend all day out in the woods, sometimes even camp overnight. Those were the only times I really saw him relaxed, away from his job and all the crap going on at home. He died in 2015 from a heart attack. Ever since then, I hadn't touched a rifle. That fall, something changed. Maybe it was the long shifts, or maybe it was the way I kept catching myself staring at the same four walls night after night. So I dug out my old .308 from the back of my storage closet. It still had the same faded strap Dad had stitched himself, frayed on the edge like everything else we ever owned. I cleaned it, checked the scope, bought a new box of ammo, and drove 4 hours northwest to a public hunting area just outside Spirit Lake. I remember Dad and I camped near that place once when I was a teenager. It wasn't regulated like a state park. No rangers, no marked campsites, just raw land, some hiking trails, and lots of trees. I got there late in the afternoon. Sun was dipping behind a long row of tall oaks. The air had that crisp bite that comes before winter fully settles in. I parked off an old gravel road that looped between a set of abandoned grain silos. Didn't see another soul for miles. Just empty farmland, brush, and a sliver of lake in the distance. I hiked about a mile through the trees before I found a clearing that looked familiar. There was a stump in the middle that I swore was the same one Dad and I sat on 20 years ago. I set up my small two-man tent, built a ring of rocks for a fire pit, and pulled out a single burner stove. Nothing fancy. I planned to be out for 3 days, 1 night to settle in, 2 days to hunt, then drive back. I had my food in a bear canister, even though there weren't bears in that part of Iowa. Force of habit, I guess. I had a folding knife, my rifle, a tarp, and an old hunting license just in case someone asked. Nobody would, though. That place was too remote. The first night was quiet, cold. I could hear leaves crackling every now and then as raccoons or rabbits moved around, but nothing big. No wind, just dry, brittle forest sounds and my own breathing. I barely slept, the kind of sleep where you shut your eyes, but your ears are still working overtime. The next morning, I hiked out with my rifle and gear, walked for about an hour deeper into the woods, just moving slow and steady. The ground was uneven, roots like veins beneath the dirt. Everything was still and brown and dry. No gunshots in the distance, no hunters. It was like I had the whole forest to myself. I saw a few deer trails, even a pile of droppings that looked fresh, but no movement. I sat in the underbrush most of the morning, scoping through my sights, rotating slowly from tree to tree, watching. Eventually I stood up, stretched my back, and decided to keep hiking east. That's when I found something strange. I was climbing a small ridge when I noticed a depression in the leaves ahead. At first I thought it was just a game trail, but as I got closer, I realized it was a man-made path. Not official, not wide enough to be a hiking trail, but clear enough to have been walked regularly. The leaves were mashed down in the center, and there were boot prints spaced apart like someone had walked the same way, again and again. The ground was soft enough from the morning frost that I could see fresh edges. I followed it partly out of curiosity. After about 10 minutes, I came to a clearing. There were signs of someone staying there. Stacked firewood, a small pile of used food cans half buried in the dirt, and a tarp tied between 2 trees. No tent, no gear, no people. Just enough debris to make it feel like someone had lived there recently. It didn't feel like a weekend camper though, more like someone hiding out, I crouched and checked the cans. Beans mostly. A few had mold in them. Judging by the rust on the rims and the pine needles packed around the fire pit, it had probably been weeks, maybe months, but not long enough to forget. Someone had been there, and they weren't too careful about covering their tracks. I backed away and kept going. Didn't want to hang around too long. The woods felt heavier after that. Not louder, just tighter. I kept expecting to see movement, to hear someone behind me, but every time I turned, it was empty. That evening, I got back to my camp right before sunset. I ate a can of chili, heated over the burner, and sat by the fire until it was dark enough to crawl into my sleeping bag. Again, I barely slept. Around midnight, I heard a sound, branches cracking. Not like a raccoon this time, slower, heavier. I held my breath, listening. Then nothing, just dead quiet again. Next morning, I stepped out of my tent and found a boot print near my fire pit. It wasn't mine. I always walk with a slight outward turn in my right foot from an old injury. This one was clean, narrow, and straight, pointed toward my tent. Whoever it was, they had been there during the night while I was asleep. I didn't know if they watched me or just passed through. Either way, they came close, too close. I packed up that morning, stuffed my gear into my bag, and slung the rifle over my shoulder. I wasn't ready to go home, but I wasn't going to sleep there again. I figured I'd hike another 2 or 3 miles east, deeper into the woods where I could find a new camp spot and keep some distance from whatever or whoever had come through. I moved slower now. I kept the safety off on my rifle. Every broken branch made my heart jump. Around noon, I spotted a buck moving across a gully. Took the shot. Clean kill. I dragged it into the shade and dressed it there. My gloves were soaked, but it felt good, like I'd earned something. I strung the meat and hung it on a limb, packed what I could carry, and started looking for a new place to set up for the night. I found a narrow valley between 2 hills, lots of trees, a fallen log on one side that I could lean my back against. I pitched my tent quick, tucked into the slope so it was less visible. No fire this time, just ate some jerky and peanuts and kept my rifle right next to me as I laid in the tent. I slept in bursts. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of soft footfalls. Not animals. Too slow. Too deliberate. I sat up, unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. My eyes adjusted to the dark. I didn't see anything for a long time. Then, maybe 10 yards away, I caught the shape of a man. He was standing still, not moving, just watching my tent.
No flashlight. No gear.
Just a human shape barely visible in the moonlight. I froze. My hands went to the rifle, gripped it like it was the only thing keeping me alive. I didn't move for what felt like an hour, but it must have been less. Eventually, he turned and walked away, not toward the trees, just away, slow and quiet. I stayed awake until dawn. When the sun came up, I stepped out of the tent. There were no prints, no sounds, nothing but a slight breeze in the trees. I broke camp fast, gathered what was left of the meat, and started back toward my truck. I didn't stop, not to rest, not to eat, just one long hike back, looking over my shoulder every few minutes. My boots were soaked from the frost. My back ached from the pack. I kept pushing. When I got back to the truck, I saw something that nearly made me drop everything. The rear window of the cab was cracked open. I always lock it, always. Inside, the glove box was open. The contents dumped across the seat, maps, insurance papers, flashlight batteries. Nothing missing, just touched, handled, gone through. I checked the rest of the truck, but nothing else was broken. No gas siphoned. It was like someone just wanted to let me know they'd been there. I drove home that night, didn't stop once. Back in Des Moines, I cleaned the rifle, stored the meat, and sat in my apartment in silence. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't go to the police. What could I say? Some guy looked at me in the woods? Over the next week, I kept waking up at night, thinking I heard footsteps outside my window. Maybe I imagined it, maybe not, but I never went back to that area again. Sometimes I think about that man in the woods, the way he stood there, the way he walked away without a sound. I don't think he was trying to hurt me, but he didn't want me there. Maybe he lived out there full time. Maybe he was on the run, or maybe he just wanted to be left alone. Either way, I got the message. I still hunt sometimes, but never alone, and never without locking every damn door behind me. Back in the summer of 2016, I went on a camping trip with my older brother, Tyler. I was 21 at the time, and he had just turned 24. It was supposed to be a short break from life. I was still working part-time jobs between semesters, and he had just finished a long stretch at his mechanic job. We wanted something simple, just a few days out in the wild. No phones, no distractions, no people. We picked a spot in Colorado, not far from the San Juan National Forest. Tyler had been out there before on a solo trip and said it was perfect. Off-trail, high elevation, plenty of space, and not a soul for miles. He had GPS coordinates marked from his last visit. We packed light but carefully. Tent, sleeping bags, small stove, freeze-dried food, water filtration pump, bear spray, first aid kit, and a few knives. Nothing fancy. The drive from where we lived in Albuquerque took about 5 hours. It was already late afternoon by the time we parked on a small dirt road near an old fire break. We loaded up our packs and hiked in for about 2 hours. The terrain was steep in some places, mostly forested with patches of open meadow. No official trails, just wilderness. Tyler led the way using a handheld GPS and an old paper map. He was always good with directions and had a better sense of terrain than I did. We got to the spot just as the light started to dim. It was a small clearing tucked between a thick wall of trees and a rocky slope that overlooked a dry creek bed. The area was quiet, too quiet, honestly, but we didn't think much of it. We set up camp and got a small fire going. That first night was uneventful. We ate some freeze-dried chili, sat by the fire for a while, and then turned in early. No phones, no music, just nature. I remember lying in my sleeping bag, listening to the wind push through the trees and the occasional creak of the forest shifting. I slept okay, maybe woke up once or twice, but it wasn't anything unusual. The next morning, we got up early. The sky was clear, blue, with just a few clouds floating overhead. We made coffee using water from the creek, filtered and boiled, and had a quick breakfast. Tyler wanted to explore further up the slope behind our camp. Said he remembered a ridge that gave a good view of the whole valley. We left the tent and gear behind and took our small day packs with water, snacks, and our knives. The climb wasn't too bad. Took us about 40 minutes. When we got to the top, the view really was something else. You could see for miles. Dense forests below, jagged cliffs in the distance, the faint silver ribbon of the creek winding through the trees. We stayed up there for maybe 20 minutes. Then Tyler said he noticed something odd about a ridge to the northeast. It looked like there was a clearing or maybe a path that didn't match the natural lines of the forest. He was curious and wanted to check it out. I wasn't too sure, but I followed him. It took another hour to get close to the spot he'd seen. When we got there, it wasn't a path. It was a cut in the trees, a kind of unnatural gap about 5 feet wide that looked like something had been cleared out in a straight line. Not perfectly straight, but straighter than wind or animals would make. We followed it. At first, I thought maybe it was an old logging route, but there weren't any stumps or tire marks. Just this narrow, cleared path cutting through thick woods. After about 20 minutes, it led us to something I still can't explain. It was a shack, not an old cabin or a ranger station. A shack made of mismatched wood, maybe 6 by 8 feet. No windows, just a single door that was slightly ajar. It looked abandoned. No sign of life, no footprints, no noise. But something about it felt wrong, like it didn't belong there, like it had been built in a rush or as a temporary shelter. Tyler wanted to take a look inside. I didn't, but he was already halfway to the door before I could say anything. He pushed it open and stepped inside. I stood outside, listening. After a few seconds, he came back out. His face was pale, jaw tight. He didn't say anything, just motioned for me to take a look. Inside, there were no beds, no stove, no insulation. Just a wooden floor with a small trapdoor cut into the center. Around the walls were dozens of animal bones. Mostly deer, I think. Some were wired together into odd shapes, like crude figures or dolls made of bone. There was no writing, no signs of witchcraft or anything like that. But it was enough to make my stomach turn. I didn't want to open the trapdoor. I don't think Tyler did either. We left. Quick. We made our way back to camp without talking. The whole time I kept looking over my shoulder. The woods didn't feel right anymore. I didn't hear birds. I didn't hear insects. Just our boots on the dirt and the sound of our breathing. When we got back, the fire ring we had made was scattered. Not by wind, it looked like someone had kicked it apart. One of our packs had been dragged about 10 feet and unzipped. Nothing was stolen, but things had been moved. Our knives were no longer on top of the food bag. They were stabbed into the dirt, handle up, about 6 feet from the tent. I stared at them for a long time. Tyler picked them up, dusted them off, and just said we should move camp. We packed everything in silence and hiked back toward the ridge. We found a new clearing about a mile west. It wasn't as nice, but we didn't care. That night, we didn't light a fire. We just laid in the tent, trying to sleep. I kept a knife in my sleeping bag, one hand wrapped around the handle the whole time. Every sound outside felt like footsteps. I didn't sleep much, maybe an hour or two, broken up. I heard movement near the trees just before dawn. Could have been an animal. Might not have been. The next morning, we didn't even cook breakfast. We just filtered some water, packed everything, and started the hike back to the truck. Neither of us talked much on the way out. The trees felt like they were watching us. When we finally got to the truck, I saw something on the windshield that made me freeze. It was a small clump of hair. Animal hair, matted and dark, stuffed under the wiper blade like a message. There was no blood, no note, just the hair curled and damp. Tyler didn't say anything. He brushed it off, got in the truck, and we left. We never went back there. A few weeks later, I tried to look up anything I could find about that area. Old campsites, cabins, even local legends. I found nothing about a shack. No maps showed any structure, and the Forest Service said there hadn't been any logging in that area for decades. The weirdest part? I tried to find the GPS coordinates Tyler had marked, but he told me he never saved them. Said he didn't want to know where it was. Said it was better that way. He didn't talk about that trip for over a year. When he finally brought it up, he just said one thing that stuck with me. We weren't alone out there. It's been almost a decade since that trip, and I still think about it. About the trapdoor, the bones, the knives in the dirt. Whatever was out there, it wasn't a ghost. It wasn't some monster hiding in the trees. It was something real, something human, and that's what makes it worse. We didn't see a face. We didn't hear a voice, but someone somewhere knew we were out there, watched us, moved our stuff, left us a warning, and we got the message, loud and clear. I was 27 when I decided to take some time off and go camping alone in France. It was the summer of 2019, and I just wrapped up a long project at work that had drained me. I needed something quiet, something far from cities and noise. I didn't want a touristy experience. I wanted to walk through trees, feel the dirt under my shoes, wake up to birds instead of alarms. I picked a spot in the Auvergne region, somewhere deep in the central part of France, far from the big cities. It was green, quiet, full of hills and forests, and almost untouched. I'd found it while reading through a few outdoor forums. Most people avoided it because it was remote. There weren't many campsites out there, just scattered flat areas in the woods where people sometimes pitch tents. That was exactly what I was looking for. I flew into Lyon, rented a small car, and drove for about 4 hours until I reached the edge of the forest I'd planned to explore. I parked near a small village, locked up my stuff in the trunk, slung my backpack over my shoulder, and started walking. The first few days were peaceful. I hiked slowly, stopped often to eat and rest, and tried to get used to being alone in the woods. The trees were thick, mostly firs and pines, and the trails were faint, mostly made by deer or other animals. I had a small GPS and a physical map with me. I camped in clearings and cooked simple meals on my camp stove. Every night, I built a small fire to keep warm and pushed my tent pegs deep into the ground. I liked how quiet it all was. On the 4th day, something started to feel strange. It was early evening. I'd found a decent spot near a shallow stream. There was a wide patch of flat grass surrounded by low trees and bushes. I set up my tent, gathered some dry branches, and built a small fire. I remember sitting there, eating a can of beans and listening to the forest settle as the sun went down. The air got cooler. Birds quieted. Everything became still, which I had started to enjoy. Then I noticed something that didn't belong. Across the stream, maybe 30 meters away, just on the edge where the trees thickened, I saw a man standing between the trunks. He wasn't walking or moving. He was just there, staring in my direction. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. At first I thought it might have been a tree or maybe a shadow. But the more I looked, the more I could see the shape was wrong for a tree. He had a jacket on, something dark. He was tall, maybe in his 40s or 50s, and just standing completely still, facing me. His hands were by his sides.
No bag,
No dog,
no gear.
just him, unmoving. I kept staring for a while. I was trying to figure out if he was real or if I was imagining things. Then I blinked and he was gone. Just like that. It didn't feel supernatural or ghostly. It felt like someone had been watching me, waiting for me to look away so they could slip back into the trees. My body had that cold rush, like when you just miss stepping out in front of a car. I packed up my things fast, kicked dirt over the fire, and moved. I didn't go far, just about a kilometer further downstream, but I wanted a different spot, somewhere out of view. I didn't even pitch the tent properly. I just spread out my mat under a big tree and tried to sleep with one ear open. That night, every crack of a twig sent my eyes wide open. Every rustle of leaves made my muscles tighten. By morning, nothing had happened. I told myself it was probably some other hiker or a local hunter checking out the forest. Maybe he was just as surprised to see me. I shook it off and moved deeper into the woods. But I kept seeing little things that didn't make sense over the next 2 days. Twice I found boot prints on narrow trails I thought I'd been the only one walking on. Once I noticed a broken tree branch that looked fresh, like someone had brushed through it not long before me. Another time, while filling my bottle in a small spring, I found a piece of string tied to a rock near the water. Just a short piece of red string, new, clean. It wasn't mine. It didn't look like trash either. It looked placed. The worst was on the 6th night. I'd made it to a higher point in the hills, maybe 6 or 7 kilometers from the last village on my map. The trees were thinner here, and the land sloped more. I found a small clearing with soft moss underfoot and decided to camp there. I built a fire again and made some pasta with powdered sauce. I was trying to convince myself the weirdness was in my head. I sat for a long time, staring at the flames, eating slowly. Just as I was packing up my pot, I heard a sound that froze me. It was the unmistakable click of a camera shutter. Not close, maybe 50 or 60 meters away, but clear, crisp, like someone had taken a picture from the trees. I stood up. My head turned fast toward the direction it came from, but all I saw were trees and shadows. I didn't even grab my bag. I turned off my lamp, left the fire burning low, and ran. I knew it was a bad idea to move fast in the dark, but my body had taken over. My heart was pounding. I ran maybe 200 meters downhill and ducked behind a fallen tree. I waited there in the dark, trying not to breathe too loud. The next hour was long. I didn't hear anything else. No steps.
No voices.
No more clicks. When I finally went back to my campsite, everything was still there. But now my tent flap was open. I never leave it open, ever. Inside, nothing looked stolen. But the zipper tab was muddy, like someone had touched it with dirty fingers. That was it for me. I packed up before sunrise. I didn't even cook breakfast. I wanted out. Instead of following the path I'd planned, I turned back toward the small village I'd started from. It would take me a full day of walking, maybe more, but I didn't care. I walked fast and didn't stop for long breaks. I checked behind me constantly. I didn't see anyone, but the feeling stayed, the heavy pressure that someone was close. That night, I didn't camp. I found a crumbling stone shed off a dirt road and stayed inside. It didn't have a roof, but at least it had walls. I didn't sleep much, just sat there with a small fire, facing the doorway, knife in hand. By the next afternoon, I reached the edge of the forest and saw the small church spire of the village in the distance. I followed the road down, legs sore, throat dry, shoes caked in mud. I didn't look back. I found my car where I'd left it, untouched. I locked the doors as soon as I got in, and I didn't stop driving until I reached Lyon that night. I booked a hotel room, took the longest shower of my life, and didn't leave the room again until my flight the next day. I never reported it. I didn't know what I would even say. A man watched me from the woods? There was no law against standing in trees or taking pictures. He hadn't attacked me. He hadn't said a word, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like an accident or a misunderstanding. I still have dreams about that camera sound. Sometimes I wonder if there are pictures of me out there somewhere. Me sitting by the fire, me unpacking my bag, me asleep under the trees. Maybe he followed people often. Maybe I wasn't the first. I haven't gone camping alone since, and I don't think I ever will. It was early November 2018, and the air in northern Georgia had just started to cool down enough to make sleeping outside bearable. I was 29 at the time, between jobs after a small construction company I worked for in Macon shut down unexpectedly. I had a little money saved up and not much else going on, so I decided to take a week for myself and camp in a few strange or out-of-the-way places. I'd always had a fascination with forgotten spots. Old buildings, drained ponds, rail lines that had trees growing up through them. But graveyards had always held my attention the most. Not in a creepy or ghost-obsessed way, just something about the stillness of them, the way they feel frozen in time. I found an old cemetery on Google Maps that didn't even have a full name, just Old Gibson Cemetery, about 10 miles west of a tiny town called Worthen. The satellite view showed maybe 15 headstones, with a dirt access path cutting through some brush and woods. No clear roads nearby, and not much traffic on satellite images. That was perfect. I wanted quiet. I wanted a night away from everything, and I didn't want to deal with curious people or park rangers. I packed light. My old green canvas backpack, a small tent, a sleeping bag, a weatherproof tarp, a flashlight with backup batteries, a good folding knife, some protein bars, a canteen, and my phone with an offline map app loaded. I also carried a stainless steel thermos full of coffee. I wasn't taking chances with alcohol or anything that'd dull my senses. I wasn't scared, just aware. Being alone in the woods, even near a graveyard, isn't something you do carelessly. I parked my pickup about a mile from the dirt path, near an old logging road that had half-rotted signs and tire ruts filled with water from the last rain. I stashed the keys in the little magnetic box I kept under the bed and started walking. The access trail to the graveyard was narrow and overgrown, bordered by shoulder-high grass and young pine. Some of the trees still had orange leaves hanging on, but most had already fallen. My boots made a dry crunching sound with each step. I liked it. No birds, no cars, just that quiet wind in the trees and my footsteps. By the time I made it to the clearing, the sun was low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the uneven ground. The cemetery looked just like I'd expected. Small, forgotten, unkempt. There were maybe a dozen stones still standing, some leaning at strange angles, most chipped and stained. A few plots were marked only by stone slabs or sunken ground. One corner of the clearing had a half-collapsed wire fence with rusted posts sticking out like bones. There were no signs, no memorial benches, no flowers. Just the still air, the dry scent of pine needles, and the remains of lives long past. I picked a spot about 15 feet away from the nearest headstone, far enough to be respectful, close enough to feel like I was really in the space. I cleared the leaves and pine straw away, laid out the tarp, and pitched my little one-man tent. I stashed my food and thermos inside and took a slow walk through the graveyard. Most of the headstones were from the 1800s, with dates worn almost smooth. One stone had a name I could just make out: Martha Green, 1852 to 1891. That's all it said. No epitaph. A few smaller stones nearby had initials, probably children. I stood there for a while, trying to picture who she was, what life was like here back then. It was getting darker fast, and the sky above the tree line had turned a deep navy blue. No clouds, no moon yet. By 7, it was nearly pitch black, and the cold was sinking in faster than I expected. I crawled into the tent, zipped up tight, and sipped lukewarm coffee from the thermos. The ground was hard, but I didn't mind. I had a thick pad under my sleeping bag, and the silence was comforting at first. But something about the place started to press down on me. Not in a haunted way, more like a creeping awareness. Every leaf that crunched in the woods sounded sharper. Every shift of wind felt a little too deliberate. Around 9, I turned off the flashlight to conserve the battery and just laid there, listening. My breath fogged in the air, even inside the tent. I could hear the occasional snap of a twig somewhere outside, maybe a raccoon or possum. I've spent enough nights outside to know how normal that is, but something about the pacing of the sounds didn't sit right. It wasn't random, like an animal rooting around. It was steady, spaced out. Crunch, wait, crunch. I held my breath and listened. The sounds circled slowly, maybe 20 feet out, always staying just beyond the edge of the graveyard clearing. I could picture it. Someone walking, careful, slow. Not trying to sneak, just not in a hurry. I thought about calling out, but I had no cell service and no desire to make my presence known. Instead, I reached quietly for my folding knife and sat upright, ears straining. The footsteps stopped. Total silence. Not even wind. I held still for 5 minutes, maybe more. Then came a different sound, something metal. A soft, dragging scrape. It was faint, but sharp, like a shovel or chain being moved over rock. That sound didn't belong. I stayed in the tent, heart pounding, knife clutched tight. I waited nearly an hour without moving. No more footsteps, no more metal, just the occasional rustle of wind. Eventually, I started to think maybe it was just my imagination amplifying ordinary noises. Maybe a deer brushed something. Maybe an old fence post had shifted. I forced myself to lie back down and close my eyes. I slept lightly, drifting in and out. At some point deep in the night, I woke to a different sound, closer. Something bumped against the tent wall. A soft tap. I froze. The fabric shifted slightly, like a hand pressing in, then it was gone. I didn't breathe for what felt like minutes. I stayed frozen in that position until the sky finally began to lighten outside the tent. At first light, I unzipped the tent and looked around. Everything looked normal at first glance. But then I noticed the dirt near one of the graves had been disturbed. It was subtle but clear. Someone had scraped away the top layer of leaves and soil in a roughly rectangular shape. No shovel marks, no tools left behind. Just the raw earth about 3 feet long and a foot wide, exposed like someone was starting to dig, then stopped. There were boot prints too, deep ones, older than mine, not matching the tread of my boots. I followed them to the edge of the clearing and into the woods, but they vanished in the leaf litter before long. I stood there for a while, staring at the trees, waiting to hear or see something, but the woods were empty. I packed up everything as quickly as I could without leaving a trace. I didn't feel scared exactly, more like hunted, observed, watched not by ghosts, but by someone who'd been there before me, someone who might come back. When I got to my truck, I checked under it before unlocking the door. Nothing there. I got in, locked the doors, and drove straight out of Worthen, barely stopping until I hit the highway. For days afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling. I didn't go back to that area, didn't report anything. What would I even say? I still camp, still go into the woods, but I've never camped near another graveyard, and I never will. There was no ghost, no supernatural force, just a presence, real, human, and quiet. Someone using that forgotten place for reasons I don't want to understand. I don't know if they were digging something up or preparing to bury something. I didn't stay to find out. All I know is I was lucky that night. Lucky I didn't open the tent. Lucky they left. And lucky I never went back. I went camping alone one weekend in late October of 2022. I was 34 at the time, living in Iowa, and working as a part-time surveyor while picking up occasional freelance jobs online. I'd been through a rough few months. My girlfriend had left me. I lost a major contract, and my father had passed away in June. I needed space.
No distractions.
Just something to clear my head. That weekend, I packed up my gear and drove out toward an old quarry site about 2 hours outside of Des Moines, near a small town called Baxter. The place had been inactive since the mid-'80s. It used to be fenced off, but now the wire had rusted away and no one really cared anymore. People said it wasn't safe, but I'd camped around there once years before with a couple of friends. I remembered it being remote and quiet, which is all I really wanted. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going, just that I'd be out of service for a couple of days. I left Friday morning, took some back roads, and got there in the early afternoon. The sky was overcast, and the wind had that dry, biting feel that comes just before winter starts creeping in. I parked my truck off a dirt road that led close to the old quarry and hiked about a mile in with my pack, tent, sleeping bag, and some food. The ground was uneven and covered with patches of dry grass, scattered rocks, and old tracks from machines that hadn't run in decades. I set up camp near the southern edge of the quarry where the slope was gentle and overlooked the pit. The rock wall dropped about 40 feet down on the far side, and there were piles of loose stone and gravel scattered across the bottom. From where I stood, the place looked dead and forgotten, just nature slowly taking it back. I got my tent up, laid out my sleeping bag and gear, then walked around to get a feel for the place again. It looked the same, but I noticed fresh signs of life. Empty beer cans, some charred wood from an old fire pit, even a broken lawn chair laying on its side. Maybe local kids still came out here to drink. I wasn't worried. It was Friday afternoon, and the air felt still enough that I figured I'd be alone until at least Sunday. That night, I made a small fire and cooked a hot dog with a wire skewer. I sat on a log I dragged over and watched the sun dip behind the jagged ridge of the quarry. As the light died, the dark came fast, and the air got even colder. I zipped up my jacket, tightened the laces on my boots, and fed the fire. I wasn't scared or anything. I'd camped alone plenty of times before. I even liked the silence, the emptiness, the slow rhythm of it all. But something felt slightly off. I don't know how to explain it. Not a bad feeling exactly, but I felt like I was being watched. Maybe it was the openness of the quarry, how it exposed you from all angles. Or maybe it was just my brain acting up after months of stress. I tried to ignore it, drank a little whiskey I'd brought in a metal flask, and crawled into my tent around 9:30. I didn't sleep much that first night. I tossed and turned. Every little sound felt sharp, the wind brushing across the nylon, the dry leaves rustling, even a pair of owls hooting somewhere off in the woods. At one point, I swore I heard crunching footsteps near the edge of camp. I shot up, heart racing, unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. Nothing, just the fire dying down to coals and darkness beyond that. Still, I kept the knife I brought tucked right next to my sleeping bag. The next morning was cold and gray. I stretched, had a granola bar and some jerky for breakfast, and took a long walk around the perimeter of the quarry. I followed a deer trail up toward the north ridge where the ground curved upward and gave a good view of the area. I saw my camp down below, quiet and untouched. I stood there for a while, breathing the sharp air, then started back down when I spotted something in the dirt near the tree line. It was a single boot print, deep and fresh, not mine. I stared at it for a good minute. It was big, probably size 12 or more, and looked like it came from a heavy-duty hiking boot. I checked around, no other prints nearby, no track going in or out. Just the one, pressed into the moist dirt, facing toward the quarry. I looked over my shoulder but saw no one, heard nothing. I walked back to camp slowly, eyes sweeping the trees. The rest of that day passed uneventfully. I tried to relax, read a bit from an old paperback, took a few pictures of the rock formations, made some tea on my little burner. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Felt like eyes on me again. Every time I moved, I caught myself turning around, looking for something I never saw. Around dusk, I climbed back up the ridge again with my binoculars and scanned the forest. It was quiet, still, but as I looked east, toward the old road that wound around the hills, I saw a dark shape moving. First, I thought it was a deer, but it was upright, slow, purposeful. I focused harder. It looked like a man, too far to see clearly, but he wasn't hiking. He wasn't wearing orange or camo. He was just walking, slowly, along the edge of the trees, stopping every so often. Then he disappeared into the brush. I backed down to camp fast. That night, I didn't make a fire. I didn't cook. I just stayed in the tent, silent and listening. I kept the knife closer now and my flashlight in my other hand. I stayed up past midnight, ears straining, eyes flicking back and forth every time I thought I heard something. Once I was sure I heard breathing right outside. Low, close. But when I peeked again, there was nothing. The next morning, I made the decision to leave. Something wasn't right. I didn't feel safe. I packed quickly. Didn't even bother rolling the sleeping bag properly. I just stuffed things into my pack and took one last scan around the clearing before heading out. That's when I saw it, just past the tree line, maybe 30 feet from where my tent had been. Someone had left a piece of rope tied between two branches. Hanging from it was a rusted can, swinging gently in the breeze. Beneath it was a pile of small bones, animal bones, probably a rabbit or a raccoon, arranged carefully in a ring. Around the base of one of the trees, I saw a large X carved into the bark. It wasn't there the day before. My stomach dropped. I didn't wait. I hiked out fast, cutting through brush instead of following the deer trail. When I got back to my truck, I found scratches on the driver's side door. Deep ones. Fresh. Like someone had dragged a knife across it. I got in, locked the doors, and didn't look back. I didn't report it. I didn't tell anyone. I just drove home, took a long shower, and tried to forget it. But a week later, a friend who worked with the county told me something I still think about all the time. He said a man had gone missing near Baxter back in September. His truck was found abandoned, and they thought maybe he got lost hiking. But they never found a body. That quarry, it wasn't on any of the official maps anymore. And sometimes, I wonder if whoever I saw out there that day had been watching me from the minute I arrived. Maybe he'd been living out there, off the grid, waiting for the next person to come alone. I haven't gone camping alone since. I was 32 the year I took a week off work and drove up to Colorado to do some solo camping in the San Juan National Forest. It was early September 2022. I remember the weather because I checked it obsessively before I left. The forecast said it'd be cool, dry, with chilly nights but no rain. Perfect conditions. I'd been planning the trip since July and already had a few good spots in mind. Nothing near the popular campsites. Just some isolated areas off a couple Forest Service roads I'd marked on my map. The first few nights went fine. I hiked, took pictures, kept a journal, and tried to stay off my phone. It felt good being out there alone, far from the sounds of traffic and the blue glare of screens. I'd brought everything I needed: a sturdy tent, water filtration kit, freeze-dried meals, and a .357 revolver just in case I ran into a bear or something worse. I'd grown up around guns, and I never liked the idea of being deep in the woods without one. The area I chose for the last 2 nights was the most remote. I had to drive about 12 miles up a rutted, winding dirt road that was barely maintained. My truck scraped some tree branches and bottomed out more than once. When I reached the clearing I had marked, it was just as I'd hoped. A small flat area surrounded by thick pine and aspen trees, no signs of other campers, and dead quiet except for the rustling of wind through the branches. I parked the truck just off the clearing and set up my tent on the most level patch I could find. After I got the fire pit ready, I boiled some water, made one of those vacuum-sealed meals, and sat on a fallen log while the sun dipped behind the trees. It got cold quickly, probably into the high 30s. I zipped up my jacket and pulled my beanie over my ears. The quiet out there was unlike anything you get in town. At first it was peaceful, then a little eerie, like the woods were watching. It was around that time I remembered something I'd read online while researching this area, a Reddit thread where someone mentioned skinwalkers being spotted near this part of the forest. The guy who posted it described seeing a man walking strangely on all fours near a campsite and hearing animal calls that didn't sound quite right. I remember laughing when I read it, assuming it was just a teenager trying to scare people. But now, sitting in the dark alone, that thread came back into my head like an echo. Still, I didn't let it get to me. I had a real fire, a warm sleeping bag, and the revolver within arm's reach. I finished dinner, killed the fire, and crawled into the tent. I had a little lantern I used to read for a while, then turned it off and listened to the wind until I fell asleep. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. I didn't know what time it was, but the air inside the tent was cold enough that I could see my breath. I lay still for a few seconds, confused, unsure what woke me. Then I heard it again, a snapping sound, like a stick being stepped on. Not loud, but close, too close. I held my breath and listened. The sound came again, a soft rustle, then a pause, then another crack of a twig. Something was outside my tent, maybe 10 feet away. I reached quietly for my revolver. My hands were cold, clumsy. I eased the safety strap off the holster and held the grip tight, trying to control my breathing. I didn't want to make a sound. I waited. A full minute went by. Then I heard a strange noise. Not a growl, Not quite a snort either, but something between an animal and a human. It made my skin crawl. It sounded like it was trying to mimic something. Not quite a voice, not quite an animal call. Like something trying to figure out how to sound like both. Another rustle, then silence again. I stayed awake the rest of the night, gripping the revolver with both hands, afraid to even shift my weight. I didn't hear anything else, but I could feel something. Not fear, exactly, but like I was being observed, studied. By morning, the ground around the tent had a thin layer of frost. I stepped outside slowly, gun still drawn, and looked around. Nothing. No tracks, at least not that I could see clearly. But I did find something weird. Just beyond the fire pit, a small pile of stones had been stacked, maybe 6 or 7 high, balanced, deliberate. I hadn't done that. It hadn't been there the night before. I walked the perimeter of the clearing and didn't see anything else. No signs of animals, no boot prints, nothing unusual except that little stack of rocks. I kicked it over. I didn't like the idea of someone sneaking up to my campsite in the night, playing games. I spent the day on edge. Every snap of a twig, every gust of wind made me turn. I hiked up the ridge to get a better view of the area.
No tents.
No other hikers, just miles of trees in every direction. I debated leaving early, but I told myself it was just nerves. Maybe a raccoon or a fox had been snooping around. Maybe the rocks were a coincidence. By sunset, I had calmed down a bit. I made another fire, heated dinner, and tried to enjoy it. The sky turned deep blue, then black, with stars so bright it didn't seem real. For a while, it was peaceful again, until I saw the movement. On the far edge of the clearing, between 2 aspens, something moved. I froze, squinting. It was too dark to see clearly, but I could make out the outline of something or someone, standing just at the edge of the trees. Tall, thin, perfectly still. My hand went to the revolver again. I stood slowly, took a step toward the figure. It moved again, not away, but sideways, back into the woods, smooth and quiet, like it wasn't walking, but gliding. I stayed by the fire for the next hour, back to the tent, gun drawn. Nothing else moved, but I never felt alone again. That night, I barely slept. I kept waking up every hour, hearing things, soft crunches, distant cracking branches, the occasional strange cry that didn't sound like any animal I could place. I didn't see anything, but I felt it, that same presence, like something was circling, probing, not attacking, not yet, just watching. In the morning, I packed up fast. I didn't eat, didn't make coffee. I just broke camp and loaded everything into the truck. The last thing I did before leaving was look at the ground where I'd seen the figure. There, right where it had stood, was another stack of rocks. Taller this time, 9 or 10 stones. No footprints around it. I drove out as fast as the road would let me, heart pounding the whole way, checking the rearview mirror like I expected something to appear behind me. When I hit the paved road again, I finally exhaled. My hands were trembling. I didn't stop driving until I hit Durango. I found a cheap motel and stayed there that night, locked inside with all the lights on. The TV was on, but I couldn't focus on it. My brain kept replaying the sounds, that strange, broken mimicry, that shape by the trees. The next day, I made the long drive home, didn't even stop to hike. I was done with the woods for a while. Over the next few weeks, I tried to make sense of what happened. I told myself it was some prank, maybe some hermit living in the woods, or a messed up local who enjoyed screwing with campers. Maybe it was all in my head, sleep deprivation, isolation, too much internet. But here's the part that stuck with me, the part that still makes my hands go cold when I think about it. A few days after I got home, I was going through photos on my phone. Most were nature shots, trees, hills, my truck by the clearing. But one of them, a shot I didn't remember taking, showed my campfire at night, flames low, the tent lit from the inside. and in the background, barely visible unless you zoom in, there was a tall figure. Half shadow, half light, right on the edge of the trees, just standing there. I stared at that picture for hours, trying to explain it, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a burned-out tree, anything else. But deep down I knew what it was. And the worst part? The timestamp on that photo was 2:11 a.m. The same night I woke up thinking something was outside the tent. I haven't gone camping since. I was 35 when I decided to take a solo camping trip through northern Arkansas. It was October 2021, early in the month. The air was cool, not yet cold, and the leaves were just starting to change color. That time of year always pulled me outside. I'd been feeling a bit worn down by work and thought a weekend in the woods would help clear my head. I'd camped solo before, maybe a dozen times over the years. I wasn't some wilderness expert, but I knew how to read a map, start a fire, and take care of myself. I'd never had a bad experience. That probably made me a little too confident. The spot I picked was in the Ozark National Forest, about 3 hours from where I lived in Conway. I chose a section near a small offshoot trail, not far from Richland Creek. I found it on a forum where people posted lesser-known camping spots. A guy there mentioned it had good views and was far enough off the main trail to be quiet. I left early Friday morning with my pack full, tent, food, water purifier, knife, sleeping bag, all the usual stuff. I parked my truck near a service road that hadn't seen maintenance in a long time, hiked about 5 miles in, then followed the offshoot trail another half mile until it just faded into the woods. That was the spot. There wasn't anyone else around. No tents, no hikers, nothing. Just wind and leaves. The first night was calm. I set up camp in a small clearing under some oaks and pines. I made a small fire using what I'd collected and ate a couple of freeze-dried meals while watching the light fade behind the trees. The sky was clear, and I could see stars through the branches. It was quiet, really quiet, just the sound of bugs and the occasional rustle in the brush. I had my bear spray and my knife nearby, not that I thought I'd need them. I fell asleep a little after 10 p.m. and woke up once around 2 a.m. to pee. When I stepped out of the tent, the air was colder than I expected. I heard something crunch in the woods, maybe 30 yards away. I froze, stopped too. After a few seconds, I heard it again, 2 slow steps. Then silence. Could have been a deer or a raccoon. I didn't hear anything else after that. I zipped back into the tent and tried to fall asleep. I did eventually, but it took longer than I'd admit to anyone. The next morning, I woke up around 7. The sky was overcast, and the air felt damp, like it might rain later. I made some instant coffee, ate a granola bar, and went exploring. I didn't have a strict plan. I wandered maybe a mile out from camp in a wide loop, checking out the creek and looking for anything interesting, animal tracks, old trees, whatever. About a quarter mile northeast of my tent, I found something strange. It was a small clearing. Dead center, someone had laid out a circle of rocks, maybe 3 feet wide. Inside the circle were some bones. I'm not a hunter, but I know enough to recognize deer bones. These had been cleaned off, picked dry. Not fresh. Around the circle were more rocks. 5 of them, taller than the others, spaced out like markers. It looked like someone had arranged them deliberately. I don't mean a natural pile or something kids would make. This was careful, purposeful. I don't know why, but it gave me a bad feeling. I backed out of there and walked back to camp. I told myself it was just something a hunter or a weird bushcrafter had done. Maybe a makeshift fire pit that got repurposed. Still, I didn't feel right about it. I thought about packing up and moving to a more well-known spot, but I'd already set up and didn't feel like hauling my stuff out again. I stayed. That afternoon, it drizzled a bit. Not enough to soak through my tarp, but enough to keep me near the fire. I carved a little from a stick I found, wrote in my notebook, tried to keep myself distracted. But that feeling stayed with me, like something was just slightly off. When it got dark, the unease grew worse. I didn't hear anything out of place, but every normal sound made me jump. Leaves rustling, twigs cracking. It's strange how loud the woods get when you're already on edge. I went to bed around 9:30, hoping sleep would take over before my imagination got worse. Didn't. I woke up again in the middle of the night, maybe 1:45 a.m. this time. I don't know what woke me. I wasn't cold. I didn't have to pee. I just opened my eyes and felt off, like someone had just walked past the tent. I didn't hear anything at first, but I stayed still and listened. Then I heard a crack, like someone stepping on a branch. This time it wasn't far, maybe 15 feet away. I held my breath, then another step, then silence again. I slowly reached over to where I'd left my knife. My hand was shaking. Another crack, closer, 10 feet maybe, then silence. And then, I'm not kidding, I heard breathing. It was low, quiet, but it was there. Not an animal, not a bear huff. It sounded human. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just lay there, holding my breath, knife in hand, and stared at the nylon ceiling of my tent. I couldn't tell how long it went on. Maybe 10 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. Then it stopped. I heard one more step, going the other direction, and then nothing. Eventually I fell asleep. I think my brain just shut off out of exhaustion or fear. When I woke up, it was already light. The air smelled like rain, and the sky was heavy with clouds. I stepped out of the tent and looked around. Nothing was touched. No footprints I could find. No signs that anything had come through. But I know what I heard. I packed up camp in record time. I should have gone straight back to the truck. I really should have. But some stupid part of me needed to check that stone circle one more time. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd find a clue. Maybe I thought I imagined it the first time. I hiked back to it, heart racing. The bones were still there, but the rocks had changed. Those 5 standing stones were knocked over, and there were footprints in the soft dirt. 2 sets, one smaller, one larger, fresh, the kind you don't miss if you're looking. And in the center of the circle, someone had placed something new. It was a small pile of hair, brown, matted, damp, human-looking. It was shaped like a ponytail, but clumped and messy. It wasn't there yesterday. I swear it. I turned and ran. I don't care how far in I was. I didn't stop until I was back at my truck, soaked with sweat, heart pounding. I didn't eat, didn't drink. I just drove. I didn't tell anyone at first. What would I say? Hey, I found some bones and hair and heard breathing outside my tent? Who's going to believe that? But a few weeks later, I did some searching. Quietly, I found a news article from 2019 about a missing hiker. A woman, late 20s, brown hair, last seen near the same area. Search and rescue never found her. Nothing. Her car was still at the trailhead. The article showed a picture of her. She had a long brown ponytail. I still don't know what I walked into. Maybe it was a campsite someone didn't want me to find. Maybe it was something worse. A hunting spot for something other than deer. All I know is this. I will never camp alone again. Especially not there. Especially not where the trail disappears and the trees get too quiet. Where people leave bones in circles and hair on stones. Whatever was out there, it knew I was there too. And it got close enough to breathe behind my tent.